You have in front of you an Accelerating Literacy Handbook. This will be our training manual, and you are to write in it. We have provided for you a marker there in a little baggie. We like for teachers to not create more paperwork, but to actually make this a part of their discussion groups all through the year. We will be writing on the last page some suggestions for the support meetings that we're encouraging you to have. So as we go through the handbook, you will be asked to write things in the back. We will be skipping around just a little bit in here, so don't become frustrated with that. Just sort of go with the flow. Let your partner help you out if you miss a few pages here and there. I will be doing some cross-referencing, so maybe in some cases you would like to just look at it later. The cross-referencing will help you to integrate it and to implement it later on. Also, you have some portfolios there that we'll be taking time to explain, because we do have to keep records and we do have to monitor our work with the students. So we'll get to those. You've got several pieces of paper that we'll be using, and you will be receiving a little bit more. But first, let me direct your attention to a catalog that I believe each of you have that has a cover that looks like this, putting it all together. And this helps us to concisely draw attention to the fact that you have many, many pieces at your school and in your literacy plan perhaps, or in your PQR or whatever, that you need to sort of put together to get the thing moving. And what we're going to suggest to you is that there are common pieces that each teacher needs to be doing at your school to bring the consistency that you need in order for you to move forward. For example, if the second grade teachers, if some teachers believe that guided process reading is one thing, and then some other second grade teachers think that it's another thing, because goodness knows, with all the different workshops that you've attended, you get different definitions of these different things, right? Then when those children go to third grade, you can see that there might be a hodgepodge of ideas in these students' heads, as well as the monitoring techniques with the third grade teachers. So what we want to do is establish what are the consistent pieces from teacher to teacher to teacher, and put these pieces together so that you have power even beyond yourself. When you link with other teachers, you're going to have more power. So that's the purpose of this. And just to get started, what I wanted to do was I want to look at some of the pieces that you perhaps are involved in. So do you have a sheet there, I believe it's yellow, that you can pull? If you were saying, okay, these are the pieces that I would have at my school that I see represented there, could you take your pencil and let's just circle some of those? Someone just call something out. What might it be?
Core literature.
Core literature, you kept that. You know, there are some schools that actually gave that up when they got their new basal series this time. They just kind of put those aside. I hope you keep those. You've taken great lengths and great expense to make sets of literature, haven't you? So you need to sometimes set your basal series aside and pull in that literature and just do it like you used to do it. Because always the basal series has had a tendency to say that you should do a story a week. And that's really not enough of reading for students to do in order for them to get practice in the reading skills that they need. So some of you do have a new adoption. Shaking your head yes on this. Okay. So those are just more resources for you to use. Got some trade books out there, right? Some of you have received training on some of these. Okay. You have kits. Some of you may have established some portfolios. Kind of circle some of the things that you have established. Sorry? Okay, everyone's got that to a certain extent. We would always like to have more, but we have that.
ELD.
Okay, in various forms. All right? And here you see what AL would do would be provide the framework for organizing these pieces and pull the adoption, the materials, the core literature, and the trade books together. And then here's one that I really like, and that is to provide information that's basic from teacher to teacher on how to teach reading and writing and establish a base of knowledge, what we call a base of knowledge. That's the last little puzzle piece right over here. That seems to be the one that's lacking. So what we would like to share with you is some information about brain-compatible research and how the brain works and how it learns and what is going on at the instructional level, and also how to assess that and use assessment then for making instructional decisions. So there would be various things that you would do. So think of accelerating literacy as an umbrella. We call this a literacy model. Accelerating literacy is a literacy model that you can use as a base of understanding to make all the different pieces that you're doing work together in a better way. Also, there's another sheet there on your table that has to do with some of the pieces that you've been working on recently. Some of the state mandates have suggested that you target certain pieces, and in California, for example, these are the pieces that have been legislated that you cover in certain types of staff development. So you probably recognize some of these, and you probably been in some of these particular workshops that emphasize just one of these components. And the way that training was set up was that you take them in isolation of one another. What we do is we put those pieces together. And in the way that we put them together, we have marked these. And so if you're doing something like phoneme awareness, then you can find ways to integrate that and place that into your curriculum in all of the different components that we're going to be addressing. So that's the way that that chart works. So we're a little bit different as far as some of the training that you've been through. We're going to try to pull it all together. And when we do that, there's an intensity about that. So I'll be talking about one thing, and then I'll scoot to another thing, and then I'll move to another thing. And sometimes it's like, wait a minute. So I just want to let you know that when you start to pull all the pieces together, there will be a certain intensity there that you might feel. And it will usually subside about the third day. And when you think, oh yes, now I see the connection, now I see the linkage, and so now I feel a lot better. Today when you leave, you might feel like that those pieces are not attached together yet. By tomorrow afternoon, we should start feeling that the reading part is pulling together. And in the writing part, we will be addressing on our third day of the training, and then the afternoon will be curriculum, implementation, scheduling, and things like that. So that's the way it's set up. If you ever need just a brief explanation of what accelerating literacy entails, you will see a teacher happily flying through the air with her children trailing behind, and you'll see a paragraph. So if you ever have to make a presentation to your board, and I have 3 principals here, which I'm very thrilled to have, you could make a transparency of that and perhaps use that as a way to communicate to your audience what it is you're trying to do. But along the right-hand side here, this sort of summarizes what we will be covering over the next 3 days. We're going to be looking at what are the balance pieces and what balance actually means. We'll be looking at ways to group the children that we found to be the most effective grouping techniques that we can use. Thematic instruction is mixed in here. So a lot of these things you have been perhaps doing in your classroom, but the way that we will find that accelerating literacy maybe enhances that would be to pull it all together. Another thing here would be the critical thinking, and that's not detached or a separate piece, that's woven throughout the different pieces. Organization, and many of these things will start to take better shape if you do some planning in your grade level teams in order to do that. Assessment is a big one that's required now, not only at the state but the federal level. And then how do we effectively use the materials that we have? So you don't have to buy any new materials for the most part to do accelerating literacy. I don't sell children's books. I just use what you have and what you've chosen to use with the children at your particular school. So this will give you just a quick overview about de-emphasizing the pieces and focusing on putting the learning puzzle together. Here's what we would like to happen as far as the agenda goes, and we try to adhere to it as much as possible, but we also want flexibility built in. We have planned for today our discussion about read aloud, shared reading, and silent sustained reading for this morning, and then to launch into guided process discussion this afternoon. This is where the complexity usually starts. The read aloud and the shared reading and the silent sustained, most of you have been doing that for a long time, and probably the guided process, but weaving these things together is what we're going to be discussing. When you look at your contents page, I have written here by the side, and you might want to write by the side of yours, that these will be the literacy components that we found to be crucial in a student's instructional day, and we'll tell you the reason why we think that. But if you would like to mark A through F there as the literacy components, and then I've clustered G through J here as being the support components. So when we're talking about read aloud or shared reading, or we might be bouncing back to the support and weaving those components in as far as assessment, the staging, and how you would organize those. Okay, now if you would just turn a few more pages back, you'll see the introduction. And now the numbering starts. So that's Roman numeral 11. We want to start off by looking at this word balance. You hear a lot about balance. There's two ways it's defined here, and there's going to be a third way that we define it as we move back a little bit further into guided reading. Let's start off by looking at it from a curriculum balance. Curriculum balance is just simply saying that every day you need to do some math, every day you need to do some literature, and some social studies and some science. And we try to balance those different subject matters and give the students a certain amount of each of those each day, plus. There's other things that you give as well. Sometimes we try to integrate those into themes. And some of your basal series that you have now have made an effort to do that. I would like to just give you a reference page for that. On H5, if you want to write that down there as a cross-reference, you will see a list of themes that we have suggested. It seems that when we're working with students, that if we would like for them to become more cognitive complex about the theme of challenges, for example, it's nice to look at it from a literature perspective, such as the challenges that maybe a character might have in dealing with friendship, or just a multitude of challenges that characters run into in books. If you're looking at this construct we call challenges from different perspectives, then the mind is becoming more complex from all of these different perspectives in the theme of challenges. That is integrated into the cognitive system so that if this child comes up against challenges, they have a multitude of information that they could use to solve the challenges in their own lives. And that's the idea behind that. You're looking at this theme of challenges from many different angles, and you'll see that right there. We also know, as we're working with these, that if we blend activities together and include listening, speaking, reading, and writing into each of these content areas, that it makes the mind more active. It promotes thinking. If the students are just sitting there listening, there's less activity than if you're asking them to listen, speak, read, and write. So we found that to be the case many years ago. And that was the time that we started to see our frameworks come out. And it would say, if you're teaching math, you should include listening, speaking, reading, and writing. If you're teaching social studies, you should include listening, speaking, reading, and writing. And so then we came out with what we call standards. If we have the standards of speaking or reading comprehension would then go across all the disciplines. You can find those standards that I think would be very similar to yours, and we'll put another reference page here, on G29 and 30 and 31 and 32 in the handbook. So if you would like to put that cross-reference to be G29, and if you would want to take just a moment and glance back there to see that, because I know most of you have had a chance to work on the standards for your own district. So what happens when you develop your standards is this. You get them all listed down, you get them all typed out nicely, but where is the challenge going to come for your staff? To mesh those standards inside of each teacher's curriculum so that the students then would be exposed to the standards and stabilize the standards. What I want you to feel comfortable in is that Accelerating Literacy has done that. These things are woven all through the entire handbook here so that you're going to be involved in teaching these standards as you are implementing Accelerating Literacy. On G29, if you want to take your highlighter and highlight 1.0, that's the listening and oral expression. Now that's usable for any content area. And then if you'll find 2.0, you'll see the writing and the visual recognition. And then on the 3.0, you'll see the reading comprehension. And the 4.0, and we'll pause there for just a second. G38 would be your word recognition. Sometimes I'll get a question about recognizing initial consonants. Where do we do this? This section right here, the 4.3, is your phoneme and phonic rules. Let me have you turn to the phonics rules because that's a big concern. C10 and C11. At the top of page C10, I would like to ask you to write up there what all teachers need to know at the elementary level in order to teach the English language. If you teach children to read in Spanish, then you're going to want to refer to J6. I don't have this in a sequence because you have books that are in sequence, and then there are some of us that prefer not a particular sequence for phonics, but more of an integrated approach. Either way that you would like to do that, the main thing is get it done. And the way that we find out if we've got the job done is to take the students over to a table each day and do guided process reading because they're trying to apply the phonic and the phoneme knowledge when they read and when they write. So we're going to be more concerned with the application. rather than the skills students develop in isolation. We want to be sure that they apply it. Here's something that I'd like for you to consider. The marking of this might be done when the student is observed consistently using specific phonic and or phonemic knowledge in reading and writing. That's when you highlight the skill, because that's an indication that the knowledge has become a graphophonic strategy. So we move from this knowledge level to the strategy level. And so that means that you have to listen to kids read and apply this knowledge. And to us, the strategies are the key, not necessarily the knowledge. Okay, so that's the way we're going to be discussing that particular aspect. So we want to give you some ways that you can standardize how the students are applying the phonemic and the phonetic and the comprehension and the listening and the speaking, and weaving that all together. And number 5, of course, is your study locational skills. Then you'll see that we have placed over underneath each grade level, initiate, target, continue, represented by I, T, and C. And then also identify perhaps what you would find on your standardized normed reference test. We've marked that with a little asterisk. This could be helpful because I hope that the second grade teachers at your school, the third grade teachers, the fourth grade teachers, reflect on the standardized instrument that you gave this year. And you look at that data as a group effort, because that's what the normed reference tests are. They're not sometimes really good to filter out individual data, but if you look at it as a group test and you say, you know, in looking at that, we didn't do as well as we would have liked to have done on this particular piece. Then you go to the Accelerating Literacy Manual and you circle maybe that particular thing, so all of you know this next year that you want to target that a little bit more, you want to work that in your instructional a little bit more. Okay, now that I've taken you in several different places in the handbook already, I'm going to take you back now to that introduction page. The second balance is literacy balance, and that's the main one we're going to be talking about. And precisely defining how literacy balance is different than curriculum balance and what that exactly means. We're going to address what we said was the literacy pieces and define those as being read aloud, and I'm going to put RA there, read aloud, shared reading, guided process reading, silent sustained, modeled writing, and we'll just put MW there, and then guided process writing. We're going to say that there's 6 basic components that make the balance. And the reason why they make the balance is that the teacher can present those on different processing levels. This actively engages the students to think then on different levels. And it's that makes different literacy pieces enhance one another. So the learner every day then is processing on different levels and thinking on each of the different levels. Those are further delineated on the next page. And just briefly, read aloud is going to be defined as being on the student's conceptual level, and I'm going to be going to that section in your manual in just a few minutes and taking about 7 or 8 minutes to go through just the read aloud. And then I'll take each one of these. This is what the teacher does. The teacher does that. When the kids can't, it's on their conceptual level. So the teacher is reading to the students. And we'll talk about the length of time and that type of thing when we get to that section. Shared reading is also going to be defined, but this is where the teacher and the students share the book. That's why it's called shared reading. The students read part of it, and the teacher reads part of it. The guided reading is where only the student reads the text. The teacher never reads it. And I make that a point because we did go through a period of time with some of our teachers' editions where they told the teacher to actually read the story and then have the children read it back. And we're going to draw a line there and say, no, if the teacher's reading it, he or she's doing the processing, and we're saying that that's not guided process reading. Silent sustained then is going to be just the student reading, and it's on their independent level, something that they can actually read. Modeled writing then will be defined similar to what read aloud is. It's on the student's conceptual level, and it's above what the students are writing to pave the way for them to be able to develop the concept about that particular type of writing. And then guided writing then is conducted on the student's instructional level. And we're used to doing that one. Now we know that there's other types of things that you can mix in your day, and we're not saying that you shouldn't, such as journal writing, maybe shared writing, and some other types of components that we think are good activities for students to do, but we have to filter out what it is we think has to be done and then what is optional and is done some of the time. So that's what we've tried to do. Okay, that's our overview. There might be some things that I have said that you would like to clarify at this point. So what I'd like for you to do is turn to your partner and talk about how some of that is being done at your school, or talk about it in relationship to the particular books that you have. Now we're ready to go into this first one here. So if you just turn to the tab that says Read Aloud, then I'd just like to spend a few minutes right there. The base of the Read Aloud is to expand the conceptual base of the student. So in this first line up here, the conceptual base. Many of our students come to school and they do not have a large amount of concepts. But if they've been read to at home, then they have more because they can identify with things that they've not yet experienced. For example, maybe they have not been to the beach, had an opportunity, but if you read to them about the beach, then they will be able to identify with what it's like conceptually to go to the beach. So you can take them in many different places and expose them to many different experiences just through Read Aloud. Also, that's where they're going to get the great vocabulary, and we say that tingles their ears to hear these words that they normally would not hear in a speaking situation. Also the phraseology, and we will demonstrate that to you. One of the things that we need to remember is the text needs to be elaborated and embellished with literary device. The listening comprehension level needs to be about 80%. In other words, they need to be able to recognize and identify with about 80% of the words. The other words, they'll probably be able to extract the meaning of it from the context in most situations. And if they're not, you just simply go on. I have some examples here that I'd like to show you. Let's look at this one. Once upon a time there was an old sow with 3 little pigs. She had no money to keep them, so she sent them off to seek their fortune. Now, what phraseology would you not normally hear in a speaking situation? Okay, no money to keep them. And what's the vocabulary of word? Fortune, sow. Okay, all right. Let's look at this one. Here's another choice that a teacher could have made. Once upon a time, 3 handsome little pigs left home to seek their fortune. Be careful of the big bad wolf, they warned one another. Then each one set out by himself. Anything there? Warned one another, seek their fortune. All right. Try this one. Once upon a time, there were 3 little pigs. Their mother could not keep them, so she sent them out to seek their fortunes. Again, you see the difference in the writer. Now let's take this one, for example. Does that do anything for you?
No.
No, what are we missing here?
Description.
We're missing the embellishment, the elaboration. Do you see that now then, if you chose this to read aloud to your students, you would miss a substantial, if not all, of the power that you gain from reading aloud to the students. You have undermined the definition of what it's supposed to do to help us. So you have to pick and choose your read alouds carefully so that you're getting the maximum power out of them. And I would say that you could provide extra read aloud experiences for some of your children to increase their verbal skills. If they have not received, as some authors suggest to us, 1,000 hours of activities in listening, speaking, reading, and writing, or with the language areas before they come to school, that the chances of being successful in the learning situation are less than children who have received that 1,000 hours. And if you kind of equate that out, this is birth to 5 years of age, that's about 45 minutes a day. Now that doesn't mean that you read with them 45 minutes a day, but what that means is that you actually, eye to eye, had them in situations where they could speak to you, you could respond back and forth. They were involved in some of the interactions of listening and speaking, right? They weren't just listening to the television set or something. The listening and speaking activity they were involved in required mental processing or active processing. And that only happens, that doesn't necessarily happen when you watch TV, right? But that happens when you are engaged in conversation. So they've had some of those experiences during the day. They've had other chances to listen to language other than the speaking language. They've had a chance to listen to that nice little phraseology that you get only from the reading experience and books, and hear those vocabulary words that you don't hear normally, like old Sal. And then also having a chance to do some kind of scribbling or working with some kinds of pens or whatever, or watching mom write a check, watching dad type on the computer. All of those things become integrated into the child's mind about what print is, and so we call that being print aware. So one of the aspects would be for them to be read to so that they see the print, and we often encourage you to provide extra experiences for those children who've not had adequate experiences in that. And so you intensify their print awareness by providing perhaps maybe a buddy reader through senior citizens, through people who will come in and read one-on-one with a child and simulate that experience. If you can't have buddy readers come in or adults come in for 10 minutes before school starts on a daily basis, maybe 4 or 5 parents who bring their children to school would come into your classroom, and while you're taking the roll and everything, they're reading aloud to these 2 students who didn't get ample experiences. Take your 5th graders or your 6th graders, and maybe before the bell rings, that they come into the kindergarten classroom. Normally in a kindergarten classroom, the children come in when they get there. The parents drop them off, they come straight into the classroom, right? So the upper kids stand by the fence. So invite 6 or 7 of those children in. Let them reread corduroy to 1 child or to 2 children. Just by them, we don't want to give them too many. 1 or 2 is enough. And that way the child gets a repeated experience of this. Also, they could go on to the audio cassettes. Let me give you another possibility for this. We know that the language development is the base of the reading and writing. And if they cannot think in the language, then they're not going to be able to read in the language the way we want them to. All right? They have to be able to think in the language. So this is very crucial with some of our new legislation, in that we upgrade our English language development component in our programs so that we're enhancing it just a little bit more than we have in the past. Here's an idea for the parents. Turn to the next page in here and you'll see it's A2. This next year, when you bring the parents in for open house at the beginning of the year, maybe you would like to go over these guidelines with them, particularly if you're a K-1-2 teacher, and share with them some of the things that I've just shared with you. Maybe you could go to your library and get different versions of something like The Ugly Duckling, and you could show them where a weak copy is not as good as a stronger quality piece of literature for them to share with their child at home. And then, just to make this a sure thing, what you may want to do is to use the idea that you see at the bottom of the page, and that is prepare an inexpensive parent library. And I'm talking about preparing it with those softbound books, like for example that you've received from your bonus points, you know, from the different various little reading clubs that your kids belong to. You could probably find 50 books out there that you could give up, or if you lost it wouldn't be that big a deal. But put them in a certain section, and when your parents come in to the open house situation, show them a parent library that's specifically for them, and include in that library just the quality books, because you're showing them what the quality literature entails, and give them some examples of the phraseology and things like that in the books. And then have, if you want to, the students check those books out, put them in little Ziploc bags, put a little note in there. There's one for the younger children, and then there's another one in there that's appropriate for children a little bit older. And when the note comes back, then they get to check out another book, and so it's an easy way to keep up with it. Finding ways for different students to become more print aware through giving them some basic exposure to books that they have not had. I don't know what your community's like, but we have communities where some children come to school and they've really never been read to at all. So you've got some, I see all of you shaking your head, so you've got some of those too, all right? The next part we're going to move to is the shared reading, but before we do, we're going to take a quick break. As we move into the shared reading now, we'll find that section B1. We're going to suggest, just as read aloud, that you do this whole class. In the shared reading, you're going to find, for the most part, a different type of text. You're going to find text, in many cases, that has rhyme, repetition, and rhythm. You'll find those words in the third paragraph. And it's easily remembered because of that. Your nursery rhymes, your songs, and also your repetitive text. The brain remembers it because it has that pattern to it. So it's easy for them to join in. Unlike the read aloud doesn't have those patterns for the most part. So we're going to distinguish this as being shared reading because different groups of children or the whole class at times can enter in and be a part of this without much practice whatsoever. It's not always rhythmic. It's not always containing the rhyme and repetition. In some cases, it may be for the purpose of adding drama to the particular piece. And the voice is used as an instrument. So let's experience some of these different things. In all of the cases, you're using enlarged books, transparencies, charts, or posters so that the part that the student is reading can be viewed. Interestingly enough, it still needs to have embellishment and elaboration. Here's a good example from a Rigby book. This is Skipper Grunch, and this is just a couple of pages out of that, just to show you. "I have a hunch," said Skipper Grunch. "You shouldn't go out to sea. there will be spouting whales who will flip their tails out there on the sea. So you get that distinct rhyme and repetition and rhythm. Now, the student's part, or the part that's repeated, is this first part right here. So here's another page out of there. So you be the students here. I have a hunch, says Skipper Grunch, you shouldn't go out to sea. There'll be howling gales that'll rip your sails out there on the sea. Now that's part that probably the teacher would read right there. Because if you're reading this to a first grade classroom, they wouldn't be able to read this part. But the part that's repeated, after they hear it once or twice, they can repeat that. Now let's just check it. Does it have the embellished and elaborated vocabulary? All right. We have not restricted this down to the little pattern books, but we still have some enhancement here with their vocabulary development. On B2 then, why don't I give you some examples of some different ways that you can share read with your students. One of the more common ones would be the choral reading, and there's room out here to the side if you want to write some of these titles down or think of some that you could use. And it's not uncommon for teachers, once they start implementing accelerating literacy, for them to go back to their school and redefine some of their books. Now there's some books that are distinctively read aloud, and there's some that it's just going to be shared reading only. And then there's others that can go into two different categories depending on how you want to use the book. Here's one that's good night, good night. I love to read in bed at night, then Teddy and I turn out the light, and as we dream the night away, our storybook friends come out to play. Who's that looking in my cupboard? It's my friend Old. Jump on my bed and join the fun. There's lots of room for everyone. Who's that climbing up the stairs? It's Goldilocks and jump on my bed and join the fun. There's lots of room for everyone. See, now I didn't have to say, now on this part I want you to join in and all that good stuff, because the text lends itself and you just want to do that. And so that's one of the advantages of the shared reading, is you get your reluctant students and they feel comfortable going ahead and joining in, because if they don't on part of it, then it's okay. No one's going to point them out or anything. But that's an example of choral reading, because you were chorally coming in at certain points just in a natural way. One for perhaps second or third graders is I like Julian Jiggs here. Now before I get into this book, I say now, she liked to dress up, you can see that. But before she would dress up, she didn't wear anything. All right, there she goes, dressed up. A long time ago, when she was quite small, Julian Jiggs wore nothing at all. Those were the days her mother would sigh as she looked around the room and started to cry. For Julian Jiggs liked to dress up and play, and this made a mess in her room every day. Now, as we move through this, the part that's repeated is this next part. Julian, Julian, Julian Jiggs. It looks like your room has been lived in by pigs. Later, I promise, as soon as I'm through, I'll clean up my room. I promise I do. So it's a good little discussion on procrastination and avoidance, I think, and probably you could discuss that with second graders, don't you think? Cleaning up the room and stuff like that. So you see that it's repeated throughout the text. So that's another example of choral reading at a little bit different level. Of course, old favorites that have been favorites for a long, long time. This is an example of one that could be used as a GPR or as a shared book. And you've got ones like this in your basal series. So here's my suggestion. If you want to use it as both, then what you should do is you should let the children read it first, the ones that are ready for this stage of book. Then you can turn it into a shared book. If you're going to use it for guided process, then you're going to need the little small book so that each child has one, and then you would have an accompanying big book. And there's a lot of series that are set up like that. You have some of both. So that's one way to get maximum use out of it, is to use it as a GPR first and then as a shared book. But it wasn't spilt milk. It's going to be the repetitive piece, of course. But it wasn't a rabbit, but it wasn't, and it wasn't. So that's another one for choral reading. Another one for choral reading, very quickly, for a little bit more advanced students, would be A House is a House for Me. A hill is a house for an ant. A hive is a house for a bee. A hole is a house for a mole or a mouse. And a house is a house for me. A web is a house for a bird builds its nest in a tree. There is nothing so snug as a bug in a rug, and a house is a house for me. So that would be the repetitive part as we move through this particular one. Now then, let's go to the next way for us to do shared reading, would be maybe to include some echoes. This is particularly helpful for ELD children. Freight train. A train runs across this track. Now let's see, if you're in K, you would be telling me the color words. Can't read them probably. Let's say the colors of this. Red. Caboose at the back. Orange. Tank car next. Yellow. Opera car. Thanks for reading those words. Green. Cattle car. Blue. Gondola car. Purple. Box car. But you see the vocabulary is still there. And that's what we're after with the shared books. We want the vocabulary development to still be there. So you have to really filter through some of these books, because you probably have within your instructional materials some enlarged books, but the vocabulary at the bottom is very lacking. Now here comes the echo part. I say freight train, and then you whisper it 3 times. Freight train, freight train, freight train. Okay? Moving, 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 moving. Going through tunnels, going through tunnels, going through tunnels, going through tunnels. Going by cities, going by cities, going by cities, going by cities. Crossing trestles, crossing trestles, crossing trestles, crossing trestles. Moving in darkness, moving in darkness, moving in darkness, moving in darkness. Moving in daylight, moving in daylight, moving in daylight, moving in daylight. Going, 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 going. Gone. All right, so you can get faster and faster as you go through that. So that's echo. Here's one for the upper grade. I don't know if you've seen this one. This is kind of like a rap. And you'll see the rhythm and rhyme in this as we go through it here. Just very quickly, I'll just read just portions of these, and you can look at them again later if you want to. But in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. He had 3 ships and left from Spain. He sailed through sunshine, wind, and rain. So what I can see is, you know, the kids getting into this, or you can have maybe some that like want to practice it even. And if you have 3 on this side and 3 on this side, some would take this line, some would take this line. Sometimes they would want to decide that they would all do one line. I don't know. They could decide what they want to do. The shared reading gives you a little place for those children who have a little bit more dramatic interest. They have a little bit more, maybe they're aspiring actors and actresses, that they can really get into the print and use that voice in such a way. Another type of big book, enlarged text and shared reading experience would be your cumulative. Here's one for the upper grades. It's the napping house. What it does, it accumulates, and you have the same piece that's said on every page. It's not that hard to remember which part they have if they're always going to read the same piece of the accumulation. These little Post-its can also give you a way to identify who reads what line. So I want you to read, you and you and you to read the orange line, and I want you and you and you to read. Okay, so you can use those little Post-its in a handy way for that. And another type of big book that you have out there This one happens to be both. It happens to be an example of the primary cumulative tale, and it also has dialogue in it. And the dialogue is readily identified in some parts of the book with the red print. So these help. Let's read a little bit of this one and you'll see the accumulation and how I would use this one. Each day, Old Mother Hubbard looked at the watermelon. Grow, little watermelon, she said, grow big and sweet and juicy. And the watermelon grew and grew and grew until it was enormous. It's time to take it home, said Old Mother Hubbard. So she went to pick the watermelon. She pulled and pulled and pulled, but she could not pull it home. So Old Mother Hubbard called Humpty Dumpty to help. Humpty Dumpty pulled, and Old Mother Hubbard pulled the... They pulled and pulled and pulled, but they could not pull it home. So Humpty Dumpty called to help. Little Miss Muffet pulled Humpty Dumpty, and Humpty Dumpty pulled, and Old Mother Hubbard pulled. They pulled and pulled and pulled, but they could not pull it home. So Little Miss Muffet called to help. Jack and Jill pulled Little Miss Muffet, and Little Miss Muffet pulled Humpty Dumpty, and Humpty Dumpty pulled, and Old Mother Hubbard pulled the... So you see the accumulation of the tale here. This one usually fools you. Yeah, you would think so, but it's Wee Willie Winky to help. Okay. Humpty Dumpty pulled, yeah, right. Humpty Dumpty pulled, and Old Mother Hubbard pulled the, and up came the watermelon. They all pulled the watermelon into the kitchen. Old Mother Hubbard cut up the watermelon. Then Old Mother Hubbard and Humpty Dumpty and Little Miss Muffet and Jack and Jill and Wee Willie Winky all sit down to eat it. So some of them will have dialogue. Now there's one other aspect that I would like to introduce to you that you need to do with some of your read aloud and shared reading, not on a daily basis, but I would say once a week or so would be probably a good goal for the K-1 teachers. After you read a book like this, say, okay, now here's this watermelon. Who was the first person that tried to pull that watermelon up? Okay, let's do Mother Hubbard. What does mother start with? Mother M. Hubbard. Okay. All right. Now, Mother Hubbard couldn't do that, could she? She had to get some help. So who did she call to help her? And what should we write here? We're just going to write the first sound we hear in their names, their initials. Humpty Dumpty. All right. So here we go now. Mother Hubbard couldn't do this, even with Humpty Dumpty. So they had to call, you remember? Miss Muffet. Some of you remembered. Okay, Miss. Okay, so we're going through, and this is a way for us to integrate some of our initial consonant teaching here into this, and also for the children to remember what characters. So as we complete this with the students, what we're doing here is what we call analysis. All right? We're taking the story structure and we're analyzing it. And after I finished with this, then I would want the children to be able to tell me what the story was about. There's going to be two things they could tell me. One could be a summary, and I'm going to refer to both of these as a main idea, because sometimes you see the main idea represented in two different ways. One would be what the story was mainly about, which would prompt a different answer than a summary statement. All right? And that would be like a little interpretation. Let me tell you where you can find this depicted in your handbook, so that if you want to put these types of notes there. This is found on C40 as an example. And also this lends itself to story writing in the upper grades. Bring in some of these cumulative tales. Just put them on a table in the back and say, I want you to read these 3 different selections, or 4, and I want you to discover the story structure, and I want you to analyze them. And when you analyze, a lot of times what we do is we map, because the mapping helps us to do our analysis. And I think the kindergarten children need to experience this as well, you know, on a once-a-week kind of basis. So if you're reading, if you give a mouse a cookie, or Where the Wild Things Are, in kindergarten you would use it, and then maybe you would map it and then do what we're going to go into, which would be critical thinking. And in the upper grades, you can collect those books together, let the children do the reading, and analyze it themselves. Then what you're going to do is spin into them writing a circular story or a cumulative tale. And these have served as the model for that type of writing. So, for example, if you're doing the circular one, you could say, okay, let's just spin one off here. If you gave your brother a skateboard, he would ask for the knee pads, okay. And if you gave him the knee pads, he would ask for helmet. So let's go back now, and you're a kindergartner. If I said to you, what was the story about? In a lot of cases, that would prompt a summary. So let's just summarize this. What was the story about? It was about, I need to tell 3 things. Who, what happened, and the end, to summarize this. All right? So someone want to give it a go? The story, you can start with the story was about. All right, that's a good way to start, and that's the way I just train the kids to say it. Okay, the story was about and her friends, okay. And what was happening as we went through? They were working together to pull up a watermelon, and then they pulled it up and ate it. If I was assessing you and you got all 3 of those pieces, I would give you a 3. If you only got 2 of those pieces, I'd give you a 2. And if you only said it was about Mother Hubbard, I would give you a 1. Turn to your partner and practice that just for a second. If I ask, what was the story mainly about? Okay. So, what does a story like this mean? Is there a message? Cooperation. All right. So, tell me about cooperation. You can do, tell me again, you can do more things if you work together. And I think it's important to show children that you can write exactly what they say. It serves a double purpose. It means thoughts can be written with these young children, because I'd be doing something like this at K. Then secondly, it validates what you said, because the teacher is taking the time to write this. So I would say, tell me again what you said so I can write it exactly like you want me to. You can do more things when you work together, is what she said. So I'll just stop right here. But as a teacher, I would finish writing that. I think you said something. What did you say? You can accomplish your purpose when you cooperate. And I would write your idea down as well. Does someone have a different idea? So, what if there's something that you need to do? What could this tell you? How could you use this information? Can someone tell me?
If you need help, you can call your friends.
That's right. And all of us need help sometimes, don't we? So you could call your friends. All right? So what I'm doing right now is I'm using a critical thinking taxonomy that you can see on C29. And you'll see that the summary is right here. You'll see the mapping or the analysis information up here and a reference that if you use the visual maps, it helps the students discover what it was about. So let's just go back to this for a second and I think you'll see what I'm saying here. After I drew this particular visual map, I might say, so what does this tell us? And by seeing that we're adding and adding and adding people to help, could help them to see that to get a job done, you might need to ask for help and you might need more than one person to help you do this job. So the visual mapping is a tool we use to perpetuate thinking and also to perpetuate it past the literal level. So we want to move beyond being able to summarize into interpretation, and the interpretation in its beginning level would be, what message do you think the author is trying to get across? Right down here under appreciating, you also heard me ask this question. So what does this mean to you? That's taking something that you've learned from the literature and applying it to your knowledge base so that the next time that you can't do something, what can you do? Were you in a situation this week where you couldn't do something? What could you have done to make the situation better or more successful? And as we move up here, we're moving up on a taxonomy that goes nicely with the types of thematic instruction or the themes of the books, the message of the book. I really do feel like if kindergarten children and first grade children, when they are non-readers themselves, have a chance to think critically with their shared books and their read aloud books on a regular basis, that it will help them whenever their books get to the point where you have to start making interpretations, which is usually at the beginning of second grade for general purposes for thinking, well, what is a good standard? Where should that be? So let me give you just a little bit more information here to write in the margin. Can you see that I have this word summarize right here? Okay, I'm going to go up here and I'm going to give you a standard of what you can do at this level. And I'm going to write here main idea and give you, on average, the who, the what happened, and the end of the story. They would be able to summarize the story. 80% of the kids in first grade would be able to do that on a consistent basis. When we make it a standard, that means we want it to be consistent. And so we have to, as teachers, give them time to practice that in our reading groups and in our shared reading and in our read aloud perhaps. Now if this is an expository text, let's just change it into that. It would be topic, what they learned, and the conclusions. In second grade, we would like for students on a regular basis by mid-second grade to be able to get a 4. Let me write a 4 by this. What is the message? In other words, they're going to be able to make an interpretation and tell you that this was about cooperation. You see, that's more than the summary. Nursery rhyme characters, working together to pull up the watermelon, and then they ate it. That's a literal summary, but that's what we have for a summary. And then to go beyond that into cooperation would be your interpretation. Now, why don't you go back and look at that G15. It's back in the assessment section, which is our G section. All right, there you see the 4, 3, 2, 1. And then right in the middle of the page, you also see in italics, it says, first graders are only expected to do the 3 on average level. Now, there's going to be at least 10 to 20% of the kids that can go ahead and go into the interpretation, but we're talking about the majority of the children are the standard there. So we did an analysis in order to go into the interpretation. That's what we were doing there, and give the children a chance to think critically. You can do this with shared readings in the upper grades as well. One that's great to use is the Magic Fish. It also has dialogue. And if you don't have an enlarged version of this, what you can do is make a copy by just printing on a whiteboard or the chalkboard the part where the fisherman called, "Oh, fish in the sea, come listen to me, my wife begs a wish from the magic fish." That's repeated throughout. Or to make this more complex, if they do have copies of this or you do have an enlarged text, sign you be the fish and you be the woman in the story and the man in the story. And you only need those 3 characters. And then they come in at the right place, and then you teach them not to say, asked the fish, said the man, said the woman, and it becomes quite a good experience for the students. So you can find intermediate stories that are good shared reading that do have the dialogue and do have the prospect of doing a critical thinking taxonomy at that level as well. Now there's one we didn't do, and that's the chants. Let's go back now to the E2. You're familiar with peanut butter and jelly? And the little chant that we're going to do right now is the part that says peanut butter, jelly, jelly. And then we go through the steps. You can see that the first one would be kneading it. The next one would be baking it, and then slice it. Let's let this side be the peanut butter. You're the chanters. Peanut butter, jelly, jelly. And you just keep saying that over and over and over. Are you ready? Here we go. Peanut butter, jelly, jelly. First you take the dough and you knead it. Peanut butter, jelly, jelly. Pop it in the oven and bake it. Peanut butter, jelly, jelly. Then you take a knife and you slice it. Peanut butter, jelly, jelly. Then you take the peanuts and you crack them. Peanut butter, jelly, jelly, and so forth and so on. Another great thing to include would be, you wanted to finish the sandwich? Yeah. Find some of your favorite pieces of poetry, and especially at the intermediate grades, work this in during this time. This is The Desert Is Theirs. Let's look at the possibilities here. See the jackrabbit in the grass here? You can teach pitch of the voice and speed of reading, the sudden leap, the instant start. This right here, and when to freeze. At the end, it could almost be a whisper. I wait. He's almost here. There's places where the rustle, you can also put some of your sounds in, your clicking, all that type of thing. Try the shared reading and give it life in the fact that there are certain things out there that making the voice an instrument is a lot different than the read aloud experience, where the teacher's just reading. This is a part where you can have little choirs in different pieces of the room. And I think it would be a nice thing if at the end of your 4th grade or your 5th grade that the students throughout the year had said, "Oh, we really like that one. Let's do that one again." And those are probably the ones that are committed to memory. And if you only had just a few of those, we've almost lost that. as far as committing things to memory. And once they commit it to memory, it's possible they'll remember it for the rest of their lives. We are down to the place now where we can move from the shared reading into the guided process by way of video. Before I prepare that, do some of you have some questions about this particular part?
I did on the rubric. I got the first three.